for Lawyers conference.
Yeah.
We are the first practitioners to talk about practicing. So I don't know if that's,
let's get rolling.
You know what I mean?
See how it's going.
Right.
See what your feel is.
Right.
Now, I don't want to cut anybody off.
Yeah.
Everybody's giving some thought to what they're going to be talking about and everything.
Sure.
And this is probably one of the most important pieces.
That's what I'm getting
know,
at.
honestly,
And I don't know really who the audience is, so
Yeah.
if they'd rather hear other remarks, perfectly fine with me.
No, it's not a matter of other remarks. It's just kind of a matter of, being deep here.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah.
okay, let's kind of just sort of play it by ear. If we just tighten our own, push everything back a little bit. I think we can do it. So.
Hello.
All right, I'm going to try
What is this?
Elena.
No, it was your strap was blocking your name. I'm Lizette. Nice to meet you. Are you part of the Warhol crowd or?
No, I'm the student chair.
Okay, good. 2 years.
Less scared, but still scared.
Were you in school?
I go to Syracuse.
Okay, nice. So you had to travel like the rest of us. Right?
Yeah.
Boston.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. East Coast, West Coast. So to be exactly my hometown, so coming to Chicago feels nostalgic for me. I am at 6 o'clock or 6:30. No, I'm not 6:30. But 6:30 we got dinner plans, the whole family downtown, so it should be interesting. Good. Are you fine back home tonight? No. Just, my life is too hectic. I just like to sleep in my own bed. You know what I mean? Yep. Yeah. My cat, my partner. So the way I like it.
Yeah, well, it's a short flight.
Yes, it's short. Exactly. So, yeah. What are you doing? Okay, good. Yeah. O'Hare?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. So I think the way I'm Katerina.
Hi.
How
are you?
Nice meeting
Nice
you.
to meet you too.
So because we have so little time, I'm just gonna go let each person introduce themselves, do their part, and then the next person. Right?
Sure.
So when it's your turn, then you just okay.
So I'm going to go
I
ahead
think
and
it'd be the most efficient.
You know to read the code words, passcodes, whatever. Is that okay? So there's some secret code words here. No, apparently we do. Judge this. Here we are. So if you could read these two.
Are we doing this
Yeah.
again? Okay, before you're saying.
No, it doesn't matter.
Read these. Yeah.
Okay.
In the beginning.
Okay. How much, Richard? I'm looking at you. Let's say we start like in the next couple minutes. Be done at 3:50.
Yeah. Turn it off formally.
Just give me an idea. We have 5 people, and I saw 10 minutes.
What time are we currently scheduled to end?
It was like supposed to be 2:30.
Stephanie, can I take a quick look at your program? Figure out the timing issues here. Want to do that?
Okay, so I'm going to try to give everybody about 10 or less, you know?
Yeah. However you.
I think that there was a clock on the window.
Okay.
Hello?
Want me to start?
Like a good spot for planning.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started again. We're going to keep rolling here, rolling right along. We will have one more break after this. This is, it's hard to say which, session is most important. I mean, it's like your kids. Which one's, the best, right? So at any rate, this is really an important panel because it's about how to bring this stuff that we've been talking about into your professional life. And that's the challenge for a lot of us. It really is. And so we have a terrific panel of people who've done this. Either in their doing it just themselves as practicing lawyers, or actually bringing it into their firms, etc. So, with no further ado, the moderator is Katja Leuenbach, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. Good afternoon to those who survived and are still here. Thank you so much for that. We're honored that you're still here, and apparently there'll be some exciting food rewarding you for your strengths. So anyway, I am moderator and panelist, and I'm facing the biggest challenge an academic ever faced, which is less than 10 minutes per person, which is, you can imagine, does not work well in our business. So I will do my part short as humanly possible and let everyone else basically take their turn by introducing themselves and then sharing whatever main points they had and then going on to the next person because we really are pressed for time. So my name is Katya Lewinbach. I'm professor of law at the South Texas College of Law in Houston. And our session is called Integrating Mindfulness into Practice. I was asked to read the opening code, Morning Glory, and closing code, Tulip. We will organize ourselves by having two parts to this presentation. Elena and myself will talk about integration of mindfulness practice into legal education, and I'm going to be speaking from a professor's standpoint, and she'll be speaking from a student standpoint. And then everyone else will have their own angle of how they're integrating mindfulness into different types of practice. So on my end, I could certainly, take the rest couple of days to discuss this exciting topic, but I'm going to try my best to just express a few points and then pass on to the next person. So three main things I thought about. First, the path to mindfulness as a law professor. I think when we get together, those of us who practice mindfulness ourselves and bring it to our students, it's really interesting because somehow for most of us, it started with ourselves. It wasn't something that we read about to teach or to bring into our classroom. It was something that we found for ourselves, and over time we felt such a change. Worked very hard, and then I had no connection with the amount of energy I was using in the process. I was just pushing and pushing and always being very hard on myself, and I ended up experiencing a burnout sort of at a point where it didn't make any logical sense, which is even harder for a type A person because suddenly you have no reason to get a burnout. You're done with all your big marks you've been trying to meet, and now I got my biggest mark, and now I don't have a next goal, so I should be in nirvana, right? Because once you cross everything off and you reach your destination, for me, it was getting tenure in legal academia. At that point, I was waiting for, the music to start playing and the glory to come. And that's when my brain just went out to lunch. So it took quite some process and opening my mind to something I would have never been open to 10 years ago. So I started looking into various things, and meditation was one of them. Then I really got into this practice. It made a huge difference for me. It helped me regain myself, my passion for my job, my passion for my students, for what I'm doing in life, and it was really amazing. Of course, it took some work, like anything else in life. The students come to me and say, well, I have final tomorrow. Can you help me teach me how to meditate? And I said, well, I could, but I don't know if it's going to fix stuff for tomorrow. So obviously, like everything else, it's a process, but once the process helped me so much, I started noticing how difficult it is on our students and the stress that they're experiencing and how they are sort of unequipped to deal with what they need to deal with as law students and junior lawyers, and starting to realize that we are coaches, and it's part of our job to not just teach them how to run, so to speak, but also give them the mental piece of what it takes to get to their destination in one piece and hopefully enjoying the journey. So over time, my interest in mindfulness and meditation, which I was excited about, I was doing something that was not law, which in the past I didn't realize was out there. And, or maybe, as my husband likes to say, I can't enjoy anything, I have to turn it into a job, like make it part of my work. So type A, right? Can't get away from that. So I started teaching some basic meditation practices to my research assistants. They loved it, and some students. And eventually developed a course titled Mindful Lawyering. Now that brings me to the next, opponents, so to speak, that just don't understand why we need this, what it is. They don't think it's rigorous enough. They think they don't need anything. One of my colleagues told me that he was already mindful, so nothing could make him any better. So it was a hard conversation to have. Also, when somebody asks you what it really means, but they never heard of it, they never read or never practiced it, and they give you 2 minutes, it's really hard to provide the answers they're looking for. So I had to develop a whole theory on how mindfulness is a legal skill, and reminding myself I'm always teaching my students, speak to your audience. So my audience was looking for a legal skill that we're supposed to implement and make our students think like lawyers and whatever ABA wants us to do. So I'm very thankful to Professor Riskin here, because his article from Harvard Negotiations Law Review was a big selling point for me, because I was going around with that and I was saying, look, they published it. Look, they're doing it everywhere else. And, I always am fascinated how I think we should be creative, but many law schools get really interested in something when other law schools are doing it. So that was something that made people think, oh, so she didn't just make it up. So anyway, first there is a need for somebody to appreciate that this is helpful to our students. And again, I always tell my students, this is just one tool I can offer you that you can work with. This is not the only tool. I'm not making you do it. I'm not forcing you doing it. You could maybe do it today. You might think about 3 months from now and realize now you're ready, or maybe 5 years from now. But I want you to have it in your toolkit in case and when you want to use it. And many of them, I run into them during exams, and they say, oh, thank you so much. This was great. So anyway, once I decided I want to do it, my next big challenge was to get this approved. And it was really interesting because people were just staring at me, and they were like, what was that again? And, I was thinking of myself as, this is a challenge of being a lawyer, persuade them. So I ended up writing such a long memo that I turned it into 2 law review articles. So that was good. I had something to show for publications, So anyway, I was able to demonstrate data. There's so much information out there on Lexis, on Westlaw. There are other articles, endless number now. So you can definitely, stand there and give the numbers and give the information and use different schools. And it's getting easier and easier to get these courses approved. You will find out there's so many ways to teach mindfulness. People teach them in the middle of their courses. They teach them as standalone courses. I teach mine as Mindful Lawyering Legal Skills course, where we do mindfulness exercises and apply them to, after we cover some theory, we apply them to various legal skills practices like client interview, mediation, and things like that. So that was my next point. So actually, one of my articles lists the actual exercises you can use in class. So hopefully it'll be helpful to somebody. And finally, the current status of just using my course as an example. One of my faculty members said, well, I'll just let you go ahead with that because I can't imagine who would want to sign up for it. And I said, well, if nobody signed up for it, that's okay. I'll take the bullet and I'll meditate over it and I'll deal with my pride. But interestingly, of a number of electives we have, including a bunch of them that I teach, so really has nothing to do with me, this is the most popular class in my school. So we have a wait list every time, and I teach it twice a year. So that just reinforced to me how interested students are and how much they need this help. And many times they're disappointed they have to wait a semester because I try to keep it close to, 20 or so, just so that we have more time to have practice exercises and things like that. So I guess at the end, it's a happy story on my end. I enjoy teaching it. They enjoy taking it. It took about 2 years to get through the process, but now in legal academia, once the stamp is done, everybody forgets. So after that, nobody worries about that, and students been giving good reviews. They're asking for more and more. They want to have meditation groups. They want to, do other things, but that's really hard for us as faculty to organize, and that's something that I'm hoping they can take and can be their own initiative, which will be hopefully a good transition within my limited time frame to Elena and what they're doing as students.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for having me here. This is honestly a little surreal, and if you would have told me I would have been here last year this time or 2 years this time, I probably would have said you were crazy. So my name's Elena Marino, and I'm the National Student Chairwoman. Is it better? That's very loud. So my job basically is I oversee, we have about 25 student chapters right now at various law schools across the country, so that's very exciting. How I got involved, I started my own chapter, so when I started law school, we had this very nice week-long orientation where we talked about, any helpful guidance other than, the horrible things that I could, become involved in. I could be addicted to things. I was given all of the stressors and none of the solutions. And so I took an elective course, actually, my 1L year. And so that started me on this path, and it introduced me to the mindfulness and the law movement. And so I decided I wanted to be able to give an outlet for other students. So I created my own chapter at Syracuse University School of Law, where I go. And so that's how I got involved. And I think that it's, grown at my school, but it's amazing to see how it grows at other schools as well. It's all based on what works for the school. And I think that's one of the best parts about having the Mindfulness and the Law National Student Division, is that I can turn to students at other schools and be like, well, what works for you? This is what our school likes. What is your school like? How can we make it fit our student body and what they need? And I think it also has to do with the environment of the law school. So since becoming involved in this organization, my school has had a culture shift, and I'm excited to be a part of that. For one of the first times in my life, someone came up to me and, we were having a really hard time as partners. I was partners with this girl, and we couldn't get anything done. She wouldn't answer me. And so finally she comes to me and she goes, you're the mindfulness girl, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I think I've mentioned this to you. We've been partners all semester. She goes, well, I'm going through a really hard time. And that was one of the first times someone at my law school came up to me and said, I'm having a hard time. Can you give me ways to do from the student body not taking us seriously? It was worth every second. And I'm thankful for her having the courage to talk to me about what she was going through, and for me to be able to give her techniques that I used and then point her outwards. This is where we can go for further help. Thank you for letting me be here and being your channel to go somewhere else. But as a law student, my meditation and my mindfulness practices have helped me too. I feel like I have better productive skills in class. Instead of sitting in class waiting to be called on and really stressing about that cold call, I actually listen to what my professors are saying, so I kind of retain the information a little bit more instead of just panicking about the information that I don't know. And I don't, shut down when I'm called at. Take a breath, think about it, and I keep going. And so it's not the end of the world when I get called on and I don't know the answer, because then at least I can talk my way out of it for a little bit before my professor realizes I don't know what I'm talking about. So, and one of my favorite things about being part of the mindful community is that our student division has such a sense of support in each other, and the entire mindfulness and law organization has been amazing for me. I've never felt so welcomed by a group of people, and I'm really so thankful for that, because for my first semester, happened for me. I realized that after my first semester, law school didn't have to be this box. My legal education didn't have to be one way, and I could do things that worked for me. And so that's one of my favorite things about being head of this chair, is sharing that with other students. If one 1L, decides that maybe they're not going to do outlines because it doesn't work for them and they're going to do flashcards, go for it. If you have the sense of self now to think about it, what works for you, what makes you happy, that's perfect. And, it might not be a solid meditation practice. We talked about all different ways. We have coloring books in our library. It doesn't matter as long as it works for you. And so that's my favorite part about being part of this organization, is being able to give that 1L or anyone that it's going to be okay that I wish I had when I was a 1L. So I think I'm a little short on time, but I'll pass it on because I will go in a circle. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lizette Bullock. I have been meditating for a little over 20 years. This started when I was in college. My mother actually approached me and said, would you like to go to a meditation training in some hotel in New York City? And I said, what? Method, which involved a lot more visualization than mindfulness does. But I did, and I went to New York with my mom, and I did the course and started practicing meditation when I was still in my teens. It helped me out through college, but it was something that I did off and on, kind of when I needed it. When I felt stress, I would apply the meditation practice, or when during the summertime when I had more time, I would do the meditation, but it wasn't an everyday thing. Fast forward to law school, I was still doing this other method of practice. Unlike this new movement, I was the only meditator I knew in my law school. I had a little apartment. It was an attic apartment, and I was able to carve out essentially a little space on a windowsill where I planted my meditation cushion, and it was something I did at 5 a.m. every day because that's how I started my day. This was a more regular practice for me because law school, frankly, was more stressful for me than college, and I needed the practice. For all of these years in college and in law school, I practiced alone, sitting by myself. I had never at that point, prior to, I guess I should say, that one course with my mother. Other than that, I hadn't practiced with anyone else. So it was a really solitary activity for me. Upon graduating from law school, I was fortunate enough to clerk with Don Kessler, who is the organizer of this conference, and he's a meditator. Regular practice with other people, including lawyers. So right out of the gate as a clerk, I found a community of meditators, which to me was terrific. After the clerkship, I started what began a 10-year journey as a corporate litigator in big law firms. So big law litigation, as you imagine, is extremely stressful, adversarial, and sometimes, frankly, toxic. I felt a lot of stress during this time period. I should say I was a recession graduate from the class of 2008. And so not only was the practice of law stressful, but being a lawyer during the recession was stressful because there wasn't a lot of work there. And so those who had jobs and who were lucky enough to keep jobs during that time period were under a great deal of pressure simply because of the economics of being a lawyer at that time. Adding on top of that a layer of being a minority in a majority profession where I rarely saw other brown people. It was rare to find other people of the LGBT community, people who were gender nonconforming. I have all sorts of layers to add on to this, but it became, for me, stress that was debilitating, a level of stress that started to affect my health. This happened because at my first law firm, I started donating blood every 2 months of me multiple times because my blood pressure was getting to be too high during the first years of my practice. And the triggering point for me to really dig in deep with mindfulness was an occurrence that I had at my dentist's office. Believe this. I went to my dentist. I started going to any medical person who would take me and asking them, hey, would you mind just testing my blood even though you're going to clean my teeth today? Do you mind checking my blood pressure too? And so the hygienist did so and had a look of fear on her face. My blood pressure was so high at some point that she said I should leave the dentist and immediately go to the hospital. She thought I was going to have a heart attack. the stress was so great for me in my life. So instead of going, I'm a stubborn lawyer, instead of going to the hospital, I went to the Walgreens and I picked up a blood pressure monitor and I recommitted myself to practicing every day, mindfulness, meditation. And after, I'm glad to say after many months and many years of dedicated mindfulness practice, my health is in tip-top shape. I no longer have high blood pressure. I no longer feel the toxic effects of stress on my body. Two things that have happened in my big law practice that really did change my life, in addition to my own epiphany. One is that I, for the first time, started going to these meditation retreats for lawyers. They're on the East Coast. They're hosted at a place called the Garrison Institute. 3 or 4 days off of each other, stress reduction, understanding, and compassion. I brought that to my practice, where I created 7 commandments of how I will practice law. I actually brought them with me. I kept them on my desk. They include things like practice kindness and compassion to yourself and others, and view everything as an opportunity or a gift. I started practicing the stop method in my negotiations with opposing counsel, stopping, taking a breath, breathing. This gap in silence sometimes really softened the tone in our interactions, and we reached resolutions faster that way. At my most recent law firm, we implemented a mindfulness program, came to the law firm. Mrs. Mintz-Levin, which is a sponsor of this conference. This was born out of an idea from someone in human resources, Lori Capello's sitting with us today, but also a few lawyers who were very interested in bringing their practice to the firm. What we did was bring in the University of Massachusetts Medical School and Mindfulness Program. They came and did an 8-week course for our lawyers, and then after that 8 weeks was over, we had 1-week guided meditation sessions. 2 of our offices have dedicated meditation rooms for attorneys and staff. There are over 100 participants at this point in time. I think it's been a monumental shift in the firm. And finally, I want to say that I most recently left that firm, not because of the program, obviously, for my own personal reasons, but I'm now at Blue Cross Blue Shield in Massachusetts. I'm an associate general counsel there. This is a healthcare company. They focus there. So it's catching on, not only in law firms, but also in corporate industries as well. So now it is a fundamental part of my work life as well as my home life.
Hi, everyone. I'm DeMars Evans, and can you hear me better? So I want to just invite everyone to just take a deep breath. Thank you. And I have been practicing as a public defender for a little over the last 20 years. And I'll talk about how mindfulness has been incorporated into that career. And in the beginning of my practice, I was practicing as a single mom, had a young child, and what everyone has said, or a lot of people have said about the stresses of practicing in large law firms is very similar in criminal defense work in terms of the stress and anxiety without the pay, without the same amount of pay. Round-the-clock work when you're in trial, a lots of trauma. Actually, that I shared a room with, an office with, 2 other moms of young children suggested to me to go to Spirit Rock's Family Day. And although I had been engaged in some practices around personal growth and things like that, not a very formal meditation practice. And so I said, oh, that sounds awesome. So I went to Spirit Rock's Family Day practices. It's a day long for parents with small children. And that was my first introduction to a more formal type of meditation practice. And I did that for a while, and then at some point I learned about a retreat for lawyers at Spirit Rock. And so I went to the retreat for lawyers, and although lawyers in my office had suggested it to me, I had never, ever been in a room filled with lawyers who were meditating, and I was just blown away. I thought it was just this fringe group of lawyers in my office who were interested in this, other people like me, but it wasn't, it wasn't really accepted widely. And so I was blown away by that, and I heard someone at that conference talk about, it was Charlie Halpern, I remember. He talked about transformation of the criminal justice system through mindfulness. And that just really blew me away even more. And I was like, wow, I've been practicing in the criminal injustice system off and running since then. I met Judy Cohen in that for that retreat, that first one for me at Spirit Rock, and I immediately signed up for her Mindful Lawyers teacher training program, and I met Emily in that program. Right after completing the Mindful Lawyer teacher training program, me and Emily, I'm kind of sharing Emily's story too, because we're like Mindful Lawyer sisters, signed up for Spirit Rock's dedicated practitioner program, which I'm still in today. And this practice has really, it sort of revolutionized the way that I practice law and live my life, in that I won't go into the details and the mechanics, because I think we've heard a lot about how that works today, but just for me personally, it has allowed me to practice in a way that is much more healthy. And not only that, let me just give you one example. So I think this one case that I had, this happened maybe in the middle of MLTT. And this was the most serious case that I had ever had in terms of trials in my legal career. It was a kidnapping and forced. If we lost that trial, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. It was a perfect storm of stressors with this life exposure, a DA that was known to be very slimy, and a number of misconduct motions had been filed against him already. My client had family members who were really just hostile, and they complained to my boss. I don't know if she's experienced enough to handle this kind of case, and they were just really challenging. And the judge wanted to rush the case through because she had a vacation coming up within a couple of weeks. So we had to do everything really quickly. We didn't have any breaks in between days to prepare for the next day and motions and those kind of things. So it was just like the case from hell. And it was a challenging case on top of that. So even with my sitting practice, in the middle of that case, I experienced some health symptoms that were so serious that I had to call in sick and go to urgent care because my body was literally starting to sort of break down. So I remember sitting in one of the courtrooms. I managed through that. I remember sitting in one of the days and thinking, because of the practice that I had been doing, that to me, who had really, his life was in my hands. I had to be focused on the jury who was looking at every move that I made and every move that my client made and evaluating everything. I had to be conscious of what the DA was saying and making really weird objections and constantly like insinuating underhanded things. I had to be conscious of the judge and how she was ruling, my client's family members who were in the audience, and my colleagues and boss who would occasionally come into the courtroom to observe. So it's like all of these different things that I needed to be aware of in each single moment. So by having taken up this practice and being able to just sit and just pay attention to what my mind was doing for stretches of time, allowed me, even with all of those stressors and as challenging as it was, to weather it through that trial. And I just really hate to think of what that would have been like without a mindful practice. I mean, people get through it, and like has been discussed earlier at our office, there's a practice of going to the bar every Friday, drinking, and a lot of people deal with the stress in different ways. Revolutionary for me. So since then, I've started a weekly sitting group at my office every Wednesday at lunchtime. We have 10-minute sitting practice at our office. I've had people come in. Judy has come in to do an introduction. We have a number of lawyers that are interested in taking a longer, like 8-week or 6-week mindfulness course. And there's a group of attorneys, a cohort in my office that are regular meditators. And so there have been people that have come to me to, in fact, the head of our office, when there's been inquiries about mindfulness, they're like, oh, talk to Demara. She's the mindfulness person in our office. So now people know if they're, and even people who don't come to our weekly sitting group at times when, we cross paths, are like, oh, I really need to come to that sitting group, and I really need some mindfulness for this. So it's just been a thread through the office that has created a slight cultural shift of acceptability. It's not viewed as being such a fringe concept anymore. And so from that, I see from the evolution for me of being exposed to myself and the attorneys and law students here and people who are already practicing, but can actually be utilized as a tool to create transformation from the highest levels of legislators who are making laws to affect how justice is administered. We had Judge Urbina or Justice Urbina talk about some of those things earlier, the unfairness, all the way down to people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and how mindfulness can be used, some of the new neuroscientific techniques and the practices that we can use to change our programming from these addictive behaviors or these negative behaviors, anxiety-producing behaviors. What if some of my clients and other formerly incarcerated people can have mindfulness techniques to use to break through systems of internalized depression, intergenerational trauma, criminogenic thinking that keeps people stuck in a loop of negative behavior patterns? There's so much potential, better conditions in our society and culture as a whole. That one of the original goals for Buddhism was the elimination of suffering, not only for individuals, but for all beings. And so there's really that potential for mindfulness on not just the personal, but also on the more cultural and societal methods. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I feel like I'm sitting in a room with a lot of good friends, so that's nice. And I'm really just excited to be here, excited this is happening. So I have been a lawyer for 29 years, and I've been a meditator for 21. So you can do the math on that and know that there was no meditation when I was in law school, which is very sad. And it really wasn't until about 5 years ago when I went to a lawyer's retreat at Spirit Rock that I understood that there was a mindfulness in law movement. And I was like, what has been happening? I had just been practicing meditation in isolation for all those years. And all of a sudden I was like, that is not the Bolt Hall I went to with its mindfulness class and everything. So ever since then, I've been, like Damaris, all fired up about mindfulness in law. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways that I integrate mindfulness into my law practice. I practice family law in Oakland, California, that I teach and coach, so that really supports my practice. It's a great reminder of beginner's mind, I guess, and how things are when you first start as a meditator. The second way is when I came back from that first lawyer's retreat, I was all fired up, as I said, and I started sending out emails at my office suite saying, we're going to meditate at 3 o'clock, come and meditate. So I work in a suite with, there's 8 other lawyers and some support staff, and I am the only family lawyer. Everybody else they're just these badass plaintiffs' employment litigators running on, litigator energy. So they started trickling in, and we started having these meditations. We do 12 minutes. I like to always, with lawyers, do increments of 6 minutes. So we do 12 minutes. One of the people who comes and meditates regularly wanted to change it. She was like, can we do 15? And everyone's like, no, we do 12. Okay. So there was something about, so sometimes we have a couple people and sometimes we have 6, 8 people. One of my fellow suite mates is now a really regular meditator, daily meditator, which just makes me feel super happy. But the other thing that's happened is I feel like there's been, and people have said, a sort of a change in the energy of the suite. That there's, because there's this sort of, these different qualities happening, I think, when we sit and meditate together. There's generosity, there's determination, there's concentration, and there's this connection, I think, among us. And, the Buddha said that the greatest support for your mindfulness practice is having Dharma. Sit with people every day who are going through huge life transitions. Sometimes they're happy, right? Because I do prenuptial agreements, and I do adoptions, and I do surrogacy agreements. So people are forming their families, bringing children into their lives, getting married, whatever. And then I also do divorce work. So I sit with people, I'm a mediator. So I sit with people in the room who are traumatized and pretty much at a super low point emotionally. And mindfulness supports me in showing up. So those people, I feel like, need me to be really present and really genuine and aware of what's happening. So mindfulness practice supports me in that in so many ways. And I'll just take a brief detour and do a commercial for a program called Self-Reflection for Conflict Professionals, which is run by Gary Friedman, who's a mediator in Marin County, and Norman Fisher, who's a Zen priest in San Francisco. And the two of them do this program for lawyers, and also we had some therapists in our program, and you do not have to be local to the Bay Area. They do remote. And it's a really, really useful way to integrate mindful practices into your work with clients. So one way that I do that is before I'm going to sit with people, I sit quietly with myself for a moment and try to set an intention of listening and compassion and presence. So it's in mediation, it's happening for me of my own experience. So it helps me to know, am I having a judgment? Am I having a reaction to someone? Am I getting caught up in a story? Either the client's story about what's going on between them, or my story about, am I a good enough mediator? Am I doing this right now, or am I doing it wrong right now? So I can notice I'm in that story. I'm not actually showing up for people. And I can draw back and be more present. I can notice whether I'm being curious enough about what's happening or whether I think I already know. So overall, whether I'm listening with a full presence. And the things that help me to notice those things are exactly the things we've been talking about today and practicing, right, which are breath and body, right? So I notice I'm holding my breath, or I notice I'm sitting back, which is like, I don't want to hear you. Or I notice I'm sitting forward, or I notice, right, something is happening in my body, and I'm able to know that because of my practice. I think when I can, I try to also offer the tools to the clients. That's a little more dicey for me. I do often say, let's take a breath now, and I've noticed that a lot of times I'll say, how about if we take a breath? And the clients, they'll nod like, oh, I understand you're trying to tell me to calm down. And I'm like, no, actually literally take a breath. Right? They're like, oh, okay. And then they stop and breathe. It happens all the time. I feel like I could do more in that way. I feel like I'm working on bringing those things to my own presence in the room. So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but whatever. We're behind time, so that's good. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
And while I'm pulling this out, let's remind everybody that, can you hear me? Everyone has to turn in that sheet for your CLE with your registration number, okay? That's in addition to the sign-in sheets, all right?
Can you hold that up, please? So I'm not going to say who's leading each one.
Right, that's fine.
So the courtroom.
And
1303.
from here all the way over to the end, we'll be in room.
Let's just do 1304 because you'll fit.
Everybody know where you're going?